My name is Evananda. I've been teaching yoga around the world for over 30 years, sharing my blessings by offering free yoga classes, currently on the most beautiful beach in America, here in Siesta Key, Florida. Furthering my collaboration to raise personal and planetary consciousness, I now present Beyond the Matrix, a program in which I have thought-provoking conversations with authors, scholars, teachers, and healers who are on the cutting edge of ideas which will inspire, educate, and open our hearts to the multiple ways we can transform our world. My name is Evananda, and welcome to Beyond the Matrix, a show that explores the mysteries of life and empowers you with knowledge concerning your world and your being. sbnvideo.tv is your free thinking zone and the place to go for all things spiritual. Tonight, we are going to discuss peace psychology and conflict resolution, which have their origins in the work of the great psychologist Arnold Mindell, a Jungian analyst who developed what he called process work in the 1970s. His research led him to conclude that illness is an expression of the unconscious. This variation of the Jungian psychology is based on the theory that the unconscious mind manifests itself through physical symptoms, addictions, social and mental tensions, and relationship challenges, as well as through our dreams. By using his strengths as a physicist as well as a psychologist, Mindell incorporated group dynamics, psychology, spirituality, together with Buddhism and Taoist principles, in one therapeutic delivery method, which he called process work. Process work reflects a dedication to accurately follow the way of nature, while bringing awareness into the patterns structuring our lives, including those parts normally unseen, unappreciated, disturbing, or marginalized. Bringing awareness to this interaction, a surprising and wonderful wisdom emerges and creatively paves a way forward in even the most difficult and even dangerous situations. Other practices have grown from the original process-oriented psychology, such as dream body and world work, and peace psychology and conflict resolution. To give us some insight into the process-oriented psychology and conflict resolution and the methods and practices of peace psychology, we have with us this evening Dr. Deri Ronis. Dr. Deri Ronis is the founder of Conflict Resolution Center and is considered to be a practical spiritual trailblazer, teaching others to have a balanced life with adventure by being an example. She successfully guides others along the path to spiritual transformation through exciting, life-changing experiences. Her credentials are perhaps best illustrated by her extensive achievements, her affiliations with various organizations and institutions whose purpose is the betterment of people through education and the discovery of inner peace. She's a certified hypnotherapist, hypnologist in Florida and California, and a Florida Supreme Court state certified family county mediator. Her private practice includes individual and family counseling, corporate mediation, domestic workplace anger and violence management, stress reduction, mediation, and meditation, and relaxation therapy, pastoral counseling, behavioral therapy, assertive training. My goodness, it goes on and on. I'm so honored to have you here, Dr. Ronis. Thank you for coming this evening. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's
what an exhausting resume you have. My goodness. I want to get right to it, though.
Okay,
all right?
absolutely.
So I hope you can help me with and the audience at home to wrap our minds around these very large concepts presented by process-oriented psychology. If I could ask you to give us some more insight as to what process-oriented psychology is, that might be a very good way for us to start. So please help us out here.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I would say, first of all, that I was fortunate to have Dr. Mindell as one of my mentors.
What, really?
Absolutely.
Ah, wonderful.
And to be with him at workshops where people were from all over the world working on this very issue of POP, process-oriented psychology.
Yes.
I like to keep things very simple.
All right.
And so part of that would be that process-oriented psychology is a combination of spiritual, mental, emotional, and psychological variations on a theme of different avenues of work. For example, the Jungian model, the Taoist principle, the Buddhist principle, the states of the mind, the chemistry of the body, psychosomatic illness. Very simply, if you looked at a triangle and you had the mind on one point, the body, and the spirit, is a perfect example of what process-oriented psychology is. When people are in altered states of consciousness, and that's not just through meditation and yoga, it could be through extreme states of anger, it could be road rage, it could be domestic violence, it could be terrorism. There is usually a spiritual, as perhaps a chemical reason why these manifestations are taking place. And so what we do in process-oriented psychology is we seek to find the vehicle or the methodology that will help someone to work through what those issues are. And part of that work is very involved in creative visualization, in being guided to be able to listen to the body where the stress lives. So for example, you might do a regression with someone through deep breathing and visualization, and then ask them to feel safe, 100% safe to do this work, of what part of the body they can feel their issue in, whether it's rage, sorrow, illness, sickness, because the body has a way of speaking to us if we can but listen. Excellent.
Dr. Mindell has developed a complex methodology for revealing the deeper meaning of bodily processes, is what you're talking about. Feelings, pain, habitual gestures, even chronic illness. Whereas some therapies or meditation techniques attempt to eliminate or ignore these processes, especially the ones considered negative or undesirable, Mindell's approach is to amplify and to follow them until they reveal their hidden messages. Could you, again, pursue this idea a little bit?
Absolutely, be happy to elaborate on this. I was sharing with you before the show started about being at Howard University in Washington at a workshop which was called Deep Democracy with about 300 participants from around the world. And this was back in the late 1990s.
Oh.
And that's almost over a decade ago. It was very intense, but the beauty of what you're asking about was best illustrated in the fact that people were allowed to express their grief, their sorrow, their anger, their rage. It got to a place where it was safe. The anger was safely contained, but where people were throwing chairs to express their rage. And what happened as part of the safety of being able to do that was there was a release that took place. So that after there was an expression of tears with all these people in the room listening to that person's pain. Now, that is a larger picture. Let me give you a smaller picture. I used to do domestic violence work on the East Coast of Florida.
Yes.
I ran a program called LEAVE, Learning Effective Alternatives to Violent Emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, I worked part-time at a women's shelter for safety from being battered. They brought their children there. Now, we did the same thing with the children in a play therapy room, whether they were 5 or 15, where they could scream, curse, bounce off the walls, get rid of that rage and that anger. And then through playing some peaceful music, sometimes classical music, flute music, harp music, we would do play therapy with them where they would draw, they would write, they would do dramatics where they could act out and do role plays. And in this kind of a way, you have an expression that frees you, that doesn't keep you stuck in old behaviors. And we see this a lot now with people returning from stressful situations such as the war, post-traumatic stress syndrome, trauma, watching the news. Just before I came here tonight, on the national news, they showed at the White House there's a public forum on bullying going on.
Yes.
And so that, if you will, is a form of oppression, for sure. And people who don't have a healthy outlet turn it inward and can end up killing themselves, mutilating themselves, cutting themselves. One of the things that the police chief of Sarasota County shared about 2 years ago at a Rotary Club meeting where I was, that the largest cause of death in Sarasota and Manatee County amongst 16 to 24-year-olds is prescription drug abuse. So this would be a perfect example of what Dr. Mindell wrote in his book of the psychosomatic illness of the mind-body in relationships. It's actually called the dream body.
The dream body,
that we have our body sitting here, but there is also all these other interior signals going on.
Yes.
And through meditation, through silence, through regression, through hypnosis, which is all self-meditation, one learns to listen to the body and become aware.
Well, I was so impressed with his realization of this, because what he was expressing to me was the fact that the dream goes on in waking life.
Absolutely.
And that the body is simply a vehicle for that dream. And instead of taking a snapshot, a cold snapshot of the dream and trying to analyze it, instead we see it in life.
We live it.
We live it
even
through the body.
Absolutely.
And so my question is, I don't have it here, but it just occurred to me, are you in this therapy given instruction as to read body clues when you see them?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
That might be, for example, someone sitting here at the table with us, and there's no table, and you ask them a question, and they answer it, and their knee starts shaking.
Yes.
Or their hand starts moving, or their shoulder lifts.
Yes.
If they would go internally and listen to what that message is saying, then they would become more clear.
Yes.
Let me go back to a simple
Yes.
structure, to Maslow's theory of hierarchy.
Yes.
Maslow
I know.
said,
I'm familiar with that.
at the base of the triangle, we all need food, air, and water. And then you go up the stages, and at the tiniest quadrant of the triangle is the human goal of self-actualization and
Yes.
self-realization.
Yes.
That is the same thing in Dr. Mindell's work of process-oriented psychology, is becoming a self-realized soul.
And also transpersonal psychology as well,
Absolutely.
where the idea is that it isn't only the dysfunctional parts of the psyche that need to be treated, but an encouragement towards the superconscious, the more those parts of us that are more divine.
Absolutely.
And to lead you into that area of our mind as well, or of our consciousness as well. So it also reminds me of because Mr. Mendel is a physicist, and the aim of physics at the moment is to find the toe, the theory of everything. And so in his in his work in psychology, he's almost the physicist trying to find the psychology of everything, inclusive of everything, that explains the whole human being.
Well, that is exactly why we are living in very interesting times.
Yes.
And why the universe is unfolding according to its own destiny, if you will, because of the consciousness of humans on planet Earth right now.
Yes.
So with what we see with the banking industry collapsing, healthcare industry in challenge in this country, the financial systems of the world breaking down, this is all part of physics. It's all part of that which is unseen, which then recreates itself. If you take a look,
it's a symptom, right?
Absolutely,
a symptom.
Absolutely. If you take a look at, let's say, when I was in Mount St. Helena after the...
You were there?
Oh,
so
absolutely.
was I.
Well, I was there after the volcanic
eruption. So was I after, yes.
Right, but we were there. I was at a conference, a peace conference there then, and we took a trip up into the countryside, and you could see the little firs of the trees coming back to life again.
Yes.
So the idea is that it's regenerative. Life is always regenerative. Long after we're gone, if there is still a planet.
And many of the ancient philosophies believe in the cyclical quality of time.
100%.
Yeah.
And I'll give you this analogy. When I was living in Belize in 2007, I was teaching there through Rotary International. And I met the former or current, I guess he's the head of the Belize Archaeological Society, Dr. Jaime Awe, because we went on many ruin trips to Maya ruins, and
I envy you?
Well, it was quite extraordinary. But the one example that he gave, and I think this is a practical example of a spiritual modality of physics of the times we're living in. With people fearing the end of the world on 2012 and all that. Yeah. He said, no, it's compared to this. If you owned a house and you rented it out to some tenants and they trashed your house, would you burn the house or would you kick the tenants out and seek to rebuild the house? Well, if we look at our planet as our home, then everything that's happening on it is a way of renewal, and that certain things are dissipating and going, and other things are remaining, and other things are coming in.
And another aspect of that is that often people do not actually want to act unless there's a crisis.
Absolutely.
And so we create a crisis in order to catalyze our creativity. So it could be that as well.
Absolutely.
So the philosophy of this system believes in the underlying meaning of all things human, and has thus given the therapist the courage to work successfully with situations and states of mind that most therapists would consider unworkable, including intense interpersonal conflict, violent convulsions, catatonia, even mental retardation and coma. Could you talk about how process-oriented psychology can successfully address these extreme circumstances?
I can only talk about it from my perspective.
All right.
Because Dr. Mindell is really the expert in that area, and that's not a total field of my expertise.
No, that's fine.
But what I can address it to, for example, in working with batterers, both men and women in domestic violence, and that's what's considered an ASC, an altered state of consciousness. And you take a person back through their life to see where they learned this behavior. And if it's not a learned behavior, if it's a chemical imbalance in the brain, then that too can be addressed. Now, it's really interesting that science is finding out is that brain chemistry is influenced by traumatic brain injury, by accidents, by horrific experiences to trauma, because of the fight and flight syndrome, that your body produces more of a chemical for survival. So that would cause extreme imbalance in certain cases. And they've actually done interesting studies amongst depression in Ashkenazi Jews, that if you go back over time and centuries, well, not centuries, but decades, that if someone suffered a trauma and then gave birth to a child that was conceived in the womb of the person enduring the trauma or had already gone through the trauma, that can be passed along to the fetus of the child.
Because it's chemically
motivated.
or chemically sent through the system, right?
And we are chemical beings, I mean, as well as spiritual beings.
But in the spiritual perspective, it is always the spirit or the psyche which is in the dominant position. In other words, that certainly when you talk to psychiatrists, they will always or often say that it's a chemical imbalance and then prescribe drugs for it.
Absolutely.
But the chemistry of the body can be changed
by
one's psychology, by one's thoughts, by simply a mood alteration,
by the food they put in
by
their
even
body.
The food they put
Absolutely.
in their body,
by the vitamins, by the minerals. There's many holistic approaches that are actually being investigated now because of the negative side effects of certain medications, which we really don't even have a clue yet because they haven't been used in long-term studies.
Oh, I know.
So that's part of why people who are on psychiatric drugs, which does help them, will go every 1 to 3 months for a reevaluation, perhaps with a psychiatric nurse, to see whether or not that medication would need to be changed.
Yes.
I mean, it's almost oxymoronic if you watch a commercial on TV, and they, of course, now are trying to sell drugs on TV all the time.
They just permitted that a few decades ago.
Absolutely.
It's
and then
inundated.
they're telling you the side effects, and you might die by taking this medication, but try it anyway. Or you might
often too
suicidal.
Comical. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Ridiculously comical. That anyone would take a drug that had those counterindications is unbelievable.
And that they're selling it.
And that they're selling it legally.
Absolutely.
But that's the power of the pharmaceuticals right now.
Well, it's the power of media, and it's also the power of the disempowerment of what our country in the U.S. is going through in terms of exploring alternative health care and what that would look like for the millions of people who don't have insurance because they don't want to be part of that game. You know, I do a lot of training right now in Tampa for a lot of different medical corporations.
Yes.
I don't want to mention any names, but it's all on employee assistance program training. And I would say that there is a lot of stress in those workplaces because people are calling people for money all day long, either patients who don't have it or hospitals or insurance companies.
Oh, yes.
And it's a horrific way of living.
Oh, absolutely.
I think every human being deserves to have decent health care.
Yes, and I don't see why that's such a radical idea or why they call it socialist.
Well, because
when it's
because if
pure humanity.
But if you made so much money off of it, the real question is,
and you have to demonize it.
How much money is enough money? Yeah. And that is why even our financial institutions are going through an upheaval.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely agree.
And that's part of the physics of what's going on. And I'll just share one other thing with you.
Please.
We had a wonderful all-day 6-hour session with a gentleman by the name of Lee Carroll visiting in Sarasota, who channels an entity known as Cryon. But he's a physicist. He started out as a scientist. And all I can say is out of the
that's
beautiful...
very unusual.
Very much so.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, yes, very much of a scientist who became spiritual, very pragmatic, down to earth, but also very much able to explain how physics is transforming what we're experiencing now currently, with all of the Middle Eastern countries vying for, overcoming oppression. The younger generation, he said, is what is creating this new paradigm shift, which is all part of peace psychology.
Yes.
I just came from a conference in Orlando this weekend, the American Psychological Association, people from all over the world, and I'm a member of Division 48, which is peace psychology. We had women presenting from India, from Ghana, on sex slaves of young girls in foreign countries, of young boys that are made to work at the age of 6 till they have blisters on their hands. This is going on. These are crimes against humanity.
I know. They take place everywhere.
Peace psychology. So I'm just going to end this little part with how the conference ended that day. Was he showed a beautiful 3-minute DVD of Iranian and Israeli youth saying to each other, how can I kill you when I've never even met you? How can I hate you when I don't even know you?
Oh, that's beautiful.
And that is the wave of how he sees the aura, if you will, of what time we're living in now, of all of these things that are going on, all the challenges globally. You know, there's a bumper sticker that says, think global and act local.
Yes.
So we might be thinking about what's going on in Iran, but we can practice that right here, right now.
Yeah.
And the more of us that will be practicing this, that will be the same energy that brought the end of apartheid to South Africa, the end of slavery in this country, the idea of healing racism. It's why bullying is getting so much attention now, because we're saying enough is enough.
Yeah.
This is not acceptable behavior.
Well, I think there is a progression societally, that I'm not a pessimist who thinks that everything is worse than it's ever been. If you step back and you see it historically, we have made enormous progress. Even though you've just spoken about slavery, this kind of slavery is still hidden, whereas before it was commonplace.
Child slavery. Child slavery,
yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we've made some progress, and I have great hope for the future. So a question that I wanted to ask is that I realize that the unconscious has many ways of manifesting itself. And what is being proposed has correspondence with Eastern philosophy, which I'm very familiar with. For example, the I Ching is very much concerned with one-time occurrences that happen simultaneously. This idea is that there's a field of meaning, that things that happen at the same moment are somehow related in a meaningful way. Jung mentioned this in simultaneity, and I think that Dr. Mendel is also incorporates it into process psychology. Isn't that right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Correct. The Eastern philosophies, what we're finding now is that science and Eastern philosophies are joining together, because that which was not understandable is becoming understandable. That which was not being able to be seen with the naked eye is now being able to be seen with it. But then we have to go beyond the physicality, which we know that physics would tell us that this table is vibrating at a very high rate right now, and it just appears as a solid object.
Yes.
It would go into what we call the force field of the energy of the mind, which is why if I'm in one country and you're in another country, or I'm in my home and you're in your home, and I'm thinking of you, and then all of a sudden my phone rings and it's you. Or I have a dream about you the night before, and then I get a letter or an email from you.
Yes.
That is that connectivity that we all experience with each other.
Yes. And we tend to ignore it instead of paying attention to these things, which can give us a real insight into how the nature of reality actually works.
I think some people ignore it because they're frightened by it, they don't understand it, but it goes back to the Jungian idea of the collective unconscious. That, right now while we're sitting in this studio, we're in the city of Sarasota, in the state of Florida, in the country of the United States of America, on the continent of North America, on planet Earth. So when you take the global view, think global, act local, that no matter where we are, there's connections happening at all different times.
Yes.
And that which seems random is not really random at all. Because when you stop and think about the thousands of people or experiences that a human can have in one lifetime, there are only certain people that we connect to in that lifetime as part of our learning process for what is our gift that we're supposed to learn while we are in human form.
Yes, and so to pay attention to these incidents is to give more meaning to your life.
Absolutely.
To the daily events of our life, that they're not insignificant, that they mean so much.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the reasons that people do that is they're frightened of what they don't understand.
Yes, and if they could remove that fear, they'd be delighted to find out how important they are to all that is.
Absolutely.
That their existence has extreme meaning, that the breath you take affects the universe across at the other, the quantum leap across the universe. Everything you do affects everything else.
That's the idea of the butterfly flapping in one part of the world and affecting the rainforest.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Now, according to Mendel, we've suppressed our innate tendencies to express ourselves in movement. his work with clients often shifts from words to kinesthetic expression.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Amy Mindell, his wife, worked with dance and
therapy,
movement, right?
Absolutely.
So it's interesting that they work together closely,
Absolutely.
right? And that we, particularly on this show, we have to inhibit our movements so that we stay on screen.
Exactly.
But in life as well, we inhibit our motions and movements.
Absolutely.
And so we suppress natural expressions of who we are by being so confined. Could you speak to that?
Well, I think that is where the whole nature of addiction arises from.
Is that right?
Absolutely, because people suppress that which is part of their nature, and the suppression of that is a blockage. And when you stop and think about all the addictions, whether it's food, gambling, shopping, substances, drugs, alcohol, it's a way of people living in spiritual amnesia, of forgetting 3 answers to 3 questions. Why am I here on the planet? What is my purpose? And where am I going? The movement of dance, of release, of just listening to your body, even if your foot's, people are sitting with your legs shaking, tell your leg to calm down, tell your eyes to relax so they don't have to be jumping around.
Yes, it's nervous tics that it produces, and
because we walk around unconscious.
Yes.
And what is it that makes a person have an event that wakes them up?
A crisis of some sort, right?
Absolutely.
A bodily crisis, an illness, or even a mental illness can do that.
Yes.
And that was what was interesting too, is that instead of thinking of mental illness or physical illness as illness, instead think of it as a condition. And that condition can be resolved, that it doesn't need to be a disease of any kind, because that has a huge stigma.
Well, it had more of a stigma centuries ago than it does today.
Mental
say,
illness.
They're mentally ill.
Yes.
Now everyone's diagnosed as being bipolar. But I think if we look at the world that we live in today, it's easy to imagine that because there's so many things that call for one's attention. So one of my practices is a mindfulness meditation of living in the present moment. And we actually have that here in Sarasota.
Oh, you do?
We have a
Where?
mindfulness. The Mindfulness Meditation Institute right now is on Orange and Mound.
Okay.
It's in the bank building on the corner on the 2nd floor. We meet right
That's
now.
That's ironic.
we meet Wednesdays from 6 to 7:15.
Yes.
And then we also meet on Fridays from 12 to 1. We will be moving to a different space, a larger space, because more and more people keep coming.
Oh,
and
wonderful.
It's only right now on a donation basis. And as a matter of fact, I will be facilitating the meditation on August 15th when Betsy is out of town. She's our director.
Excellent, excellent. I'm so glad to hear that.
Yes.
Well, then, even though we've brushed against it, I'd like you to maybe just to give us some more direct answers to what peace psychology is. I know it's actually a separate division of the APA which focuses on dialogues and citizen action based on transforming conflicts around the world, in city, in a family, or in oneself. But if you could just give us because a lot of people, when I've mentioned that you were a peace psychologist, they said, "What in the world is that?" So.
Well, peace psychology is a specific division of the APA, and it is it's actually a modality or various modalities through art, through dance, through dialogue, through altered states of consciousness. It includes everything.
So
and it's usually a process. Like when we do citizen diplomacy, for example, we might have people from all different backgrounds, all different religions sitting together in what's known as a Healing Racism Study Circle, which is something I've done right here in Sarasota at Sarasota High School with grants, especially after we had the shooting at the cinema down on Main Street about 2 years ago.
Oh, yes.
And what we did was we brought together about 16 boys from all different backgrounds, African American, Latino, the good old boys, you know, the kids who say live out in the woods.
Yes.
And after about 16 weeks of dialogue and them hearing each other's reality, they started inviting one another over to their homes.
Oh, so it's just the matter of getting them together and
dismantling the perception of other. You are other. You are bad. At the Sarasota Film Festival last year, we had a wonderful documentary, My So-Called Enemy, where this woman went over to Israel and Palestine and the West Bank, and there were girls taken, teenagers, brought to a camp in New Jersey. I'm not sure if it was from Legacy International, but the documentary was bringing all these girls together who normally wouldn't be friends. They would hate each other. And then after their time together at this camp, several weeks, it was really hard for them to leave and go back, because when you're going back to your country and you're hearing bombs dropping, and yet you're trying to connect with each other on the internet that I still love you even though your people are killing my people.
Yes. But isn't there even a cultural push towards or mandate towards creating divisions? I mean, even the way we elect our representatives is done by dividing people instead of bringing them together. And so it happens on a political level, and on a so then it sort of trickles down through society.
It has through the centuries. I mean, if you go back to even Judeo-Christian history, there was a model about what was right and what was wrong, okay? What was positive, what was negative. What I like to do is think of it as Neanderthal consciousness before people became super conscious or had self-realization to know that their actions do make a difference. So politically in our country, I mean, we're still at the kindergarten level with these assaults on TV between the ads of the president and the presidential contender vying, you know, this one's lying, what's this one doing? In 1999, I was at a conference in Washington, D.C. with Ralph Nader. It was called Spiritual Politics. And it was a book written by Corinne McLaughlin and David Gordon. We had the U.S. Treasurer there at the time. And we had many people. Neil Donald Walsh was there. And the idea was that what would it look like to elect people into power who were spiritually aware? I mean, it would
I can hardly imagine.
I can hardly imagine, you know, because when you stop and think of politics, you almost say you have to be crazy to run in it, because it's so hard to remain honest and truthful, and it's almost
you can't get elected without money.
And
so you have to serve money as your god.
And that's part of why our planet is experiencing what it is globally with the economic breakdown of countries needing to be bailed out, not families, not individuals, not corporations, and it all came from greed.
Institutionalized greed.
Absolutely correct.
I think that within each system you always find people who want to do good, but they're victims of the system that they work in.
It's systemic.
And it's the same in the military. There are many people in the military who are extremely decent people, but unfortunately that it's driven by forces that are completely owned by the money machine.
You know, years ago when I was doing my research, there was a book called None Dare Call a Conspiracy.
Oh, yes. I do remember that one.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful, based on all the documents in the Library of Congress.
Yes.
And the theory about the Trilateral Commission.
Oh, yes.
And that the 12 wealthiest families control what goes on in the world. You know, once we know that, I think the question is, what do we give our attention to? You know, is it man or is it spirit? And I always like to think that we're all here having a temporary experience. I remember before my father died, he said something about, how do you want to be remembered when you go? Here lies a person who lived a good life and made a difference, or here lies a miserable human being. There are certain things that we are not in control of.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
And what we can do, I believe, as whether we're in peace psychologists or people who are just spiritually enlightened, spiritually aware, we are all the guru, we are all the divinity, we all have aspects of that in us. It was given to us from when we were first born.
Yes.
You see, so we have this hierarchy of respect. You know, when you do corporate mediation and you have dominance and you have, you know, supervisors, you know, what's going on actually in America now is there's a whole move towards holistic movements in corporations where you have an open door policy, where don't do just because I tell you to, but where you have the worker giving you suggestions about what needs to be done to make change. So you could see this whole discussion is endemic. It's part of every. It's your interaction in the food store when you're standing in line.
So what you're saying, it's almost inevitable that if a person takes care of their own spiritual life, that if they become self-aware, that then it doesn't matter what the powers that be are doing.
Absolutely.
Because ultimately that will change if more and more people become self-governing.
You know, one of the principles that I think was definitely spiritually inspired to speak to that was the 12-step recovery movement that's out there today.
Oh, that's interesting.
And absolutely. And
yes.
I will tell you something. I was actually at an event in San Antonio, Texas, 2 years ago, which was the 75th annual convention of AA. I'm not in AA, but I was there to support someone in it. And I saw about 60,000 people from 90 countries come together and join hands, say the Lord's Prayer in the Alamodome. You could hear a pin drop.
Oh, how beautiful.
So when you talk about the spiritual awareness that's going on our planet right now, it's huge.
Yes.
It's huge.
Yes.
In terms of people's awareness about what's really important, because the idea behind peace psychology is that everything is temporary in this world.
Yeah.
And if we came here to do what's called tikkun olam, healing or repairing the world, then each generation hopefully leaves the world a different place.
A little bit better.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, do you believe in the 100th monkey
theory?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Why should I wash my yams in sand when I could be washing them in water?
In other words, that if people aren't familiar with it, is that at a certain point, if enough consciousness is doing the same thing, that it becomes an infection to the rest of the species.
Absolutely.
And they pick it up, and before you know it, without being trained to do so, they are also doing the same thing.
Because it's one-on-one.
So this is the 100th monkey, and I believe that will go on. If there's enough of us, that we don't have to worry about them anymore.
There are enough of us doing this out there.
Yeah,
it doesn't
I believe
always
so
get
too.
publicized.
Yes. So, how does conflict resolution relate to psycho-spiritual based counseling or psychology? I just wanted to know this. And what is the difference between the traditional counseling or therapy and what you do?
Well, thank you for saying that, because I am not a clinical psychologist. I am a pastoral counselor.
Yes.
My background is psycho-spiritual and different modalities.
Mm-hmm.
I think in our country, I can only speak to our country, we have so many definitions of psychology. We have clinical psychologists, we have psychiatrists, we have master's level social workers, we have master's level counselors, we have certified addictions professionals, we have licensed marriage family therapists.
There's 100 different psychologies.
100 different modalities out there.
of psychology.
And I think the difference between, like, mediation, for example, mediation is nothing to do with traditional psychology, but it is all having to do with the psyche, the way a person is expressing themselves. So if you talk about 21st century consciousness and creating paradigms or awareness for people, imagine that a husband and wife who are in conflict want to get divorced, they think they want to get divorced, and there aren't enough judges on the bar, so it's mandated, even though mediation is voluntary, but it's mandated, kind of oxymoronic, that they go in front of a mediator.
Yeah.
Now, a good mediator will not give you any solutions. They will be a facilitator, a neutral third-party observer of a process, saying, well, why don't you tell us here everything that bothers you? And then when you're done speaking, the other person will have the option to do the same thing. Very often what happens is these couples decide that they want to work on their marriage. because now they have a whole different way of experiencing the expression of being able to be heard.
Right.
And then I'll give you another example of that. We do that in school-based mediation, where we ask kids, okay, you make the choice here. What would you choose to do? What will be the consequence for this behavior? And what do you want to see the change that would come out of it? It's really a way of giving people power to become conscious, to make decisions that will be in their own best interest, rather than saying to an attorney or a judge, well, I'm too stupid, you do it for me. Now, that's not to negate what is, quote unquote, a system of legitimacy through legality, because I'm not an attorney, but I've worked with attorneys. I do postal mediation. Very often in a postal mediation, all that the people are seeking is to be treated with dignity, kindness, and respect.
Yes.
And even in a marriage where there could be verbal violence or emotional abuse.
Yes.
Those are learned behaviors. I say to people, well, do you think that if you scream at each other, it's going to change anything? It might give you a heart attack, it might give you a headache, it might make you sick, but people don't have to speak to each other that way.
And often when people raise their voices, it's because they feel they're not being heard.
Absolutely.
And so they need to understand that when a person is yelling at you, they're crying out to be heard.
Absolutely.
And you're not listening.
It's called listening as an act of love.
Yes, listening is an act of love.
And mediation gives people the opportunity to do that, as does peace psychology, because you're offering people the opportunity
it's
to
a very
express
beautiful
what they
thing,
feel.
I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very healing.
Very healing. Now, some of the other areas that you work and lecture on are very, very interesting, and perhaps we should touch upon a few of these now.
Okay.
Okay? What interested me was understanding gender roles and relationships in the 21st century. What are some of the major issues that come up around gender roles and relationships, and how do you go about solving them? Seems to be a huge problem. It's in modern life.
It's a huge opportunity.
Particularly in America.
Absolutely. It's a huge opportunity in disguise when we look at a challenge, okay? For example, in 1999, I was at an international peace conference in Den Haag with a professor from Bar-Ilan University. Our presentation in that particular seminar was exactly on gender roles.
All right.
And in the 21st century, and we had men and women from all different cultures and countries. I can give a good example of a man from England who said, well, I don't know if I should open the door for the woman or not because she might resent me for it. Now, that would be one example, okay, a very basic one.
I know this is exactly the kind of thing that comes up.
But let's talk about economics. Let's talk about women who earn more money than their husbands or earn a good salary because of their education. Let's talk about stay-at-home fathers. Let's talk about countries that allow parents 16 months or 24 months to be with their babies compared to 3 or 4 months in this country when they're first born. You have, or we have on the planet in different cultures and different civilizations, different governments, opportunities of how people are allowed to be in a situation, in a relationship. For example, in certain corporations or companies, you can be on a first name basis. You don't have to be on a sir or miss or ma'am, that kind of thing. So I would say that it's changing. Gender roles are changing. Do you know that in certain countries in Africa, when a female child is born, they take on the mother's last name because that maintains the matrilineal part of that family. Women choosing to keep their own name in marriage has nothing to do with not being in love with someone. It has to do with them choosing to be their own person. If you go back to the Judeo-Christian Bible and you take a look at once upon a time when women were married, what were we taught thousands of years ago? Women were taught that they were just a piece of property, that their family would give a dowry, shekels or lambs or something to get their daughter off their hands because what could they do with her? And even if you look at China today where they would kill female babies because the male is more important, all of that is changing. Those are crimes against humanity. Every life has value. Part of the experience I had this weekend at the APA conference in Orlando spoke about human child sex trafficking of youngsters.
Oh, yes, my goodness.
And working,
the worst possible.
and kids working, males working in Africa where their hands get boils on them for being in the water all the time. You know, I mean, there's so many things going on that could overwhelm us.
Mm-hmm.
But when you talk about gender roles in the 21st century, it affects everybody.
Yes, it does. Yes, it's ubiquitous. And I guess even in countries in which women are suppressed, there's a sort of a flowering of freedom.
Well, absolutely. And that's being done through micro-society loans, where smaller groups of individuals are giving loans to smaller groups of women so that they can make their products and they could be sent to the United States, let's say, to buy, and they can then take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, excellent.
A lot of it has to do with economics.
Well, yes, but even in this country, where we are economically superior, or at least somewhat superior once upon a time, nonetheless, there is still a lot of gender debate going on.
Yes.
And it's evolving. We don't know exactly where it's headed, because a woman's never been given the opportunity to be herself.
Well, in many places now it is happening, but it's taking an adjustment.
Yes.
Of consciousness of one person at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Even the idea of a woman as a president of this country.
Yes. We elected a black man before a woman, after all. Yes. And another area of your interest, you deal with the subject of how to handle stress and meditation for everyone, answering the question, why should I meditate? And of course, I teach yoga, so this subject interests me. So if you could talk about that for just a little while.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I actually was drawn to meditation when I was a teenager. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and a friend of mine gave me the book Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda when I was 17. My mother introduced me to yoga, which she stopped practicing when I was a teenager. So I was drawn to things that were spiritual. And what meditation really does for a person, it helps them to detach from the world.
That's true.
And I think we need to learn how to do that so we can be in the world but not of the world.
Yes.
Wear the world like a loose garment.
Yes.
And I think what happens is we get so attached, even though it's temporary. So by learning to meditate, you shut the mind off. You know, it reminds me of a passage by Nikos Kazantzakis, who is the author of Zorba the Greek.
Zorba the Greek,
and
yes.
I love this one sentence where he says, so they have escaped from thinking and conquered the world.
Yeah.
And when you do that with meditation, you're in the present moment. You're focusing on your breath. You're focusing on the sound of the breath. You're focusing on the sounds around you. So it transports your consciousness from normal things that, you know, I got to pay this bill, I want to go to that movie, what am I going to, you know, it detaches you from the world. And by taking time to detach, then you can be more fully present.
That's it. Thank you for saying that. That's beautifully said. Exactly. And I recommend it to everyone. Even there are many levels of meditation. You can use it towards simply gaining peace and allowing yourself to heal from negative life situations. But it can also take you into realms of the inner world and for inner exploration. It depends on what your motivation is. It has degrees. So,
I think it goes to that saying by Socrates, know thyself.
Yes. So that's the we should have that impetus in life, because an unexamined life is really not one worth living, as they said, right?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
It all fits together.
It all fits together. And let me move ahead here. I don't want to run out of time.
Right.
Could you please explain how you see progress in the area of traditional psychology aligning with spiritual ideologies in light of life in the 21st century?
Well, as I said a little bit earlier, science and spirituality, science and religion are starting to come together. That is because there are gaps that are being bridged. I think that You can see it in terms of what's going on with treatment centers for the field of addiction, which is very much based on a spiritual understanding, that it's not all just what you can feel with your hands.
Yes.
So this is the physics, if you the Tao of physics, that is coming together of the things that we don't really even understand about how the stars stay up in the sky, how we're sitting here because of gravity, you know. I mean, it's really phenomenal when you stop and think about the larger scope of everything that we take for granted in our lives. Being able to get in our car and drive on a road, you know, going over the Sunshine Skyway Bridge is a miracle to see what humans can build.
Our life is built of miracles.
Absolutely.
If we just see it in that light.
Exactly, and I think that when people have a wake-up call, it's usually through some traumatic event, and that is what alters their brain chemistry, if you will, and shatters it, like where their whole world is turned upside down.
Yeah.
And everything that they tenaciously held on to, they either fought to maintain and maybe died that way, or they let go and went on to live.
Well, we're getting quite close to the end of the program, and I'd like you to let the audience know how they can reach you, and maybe some of the books that you have that they can purchase. If you'd go into that just as we're ending here.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I love this show. It's great. the subject matter, you know.
Of course.
Whether it's Spiritual Broadcasting
Network,
and it's spirituality made practical.
That's right.
People can reach me off of my website, which is 3 W's and a dot, and then DR for Dr. Deri, DERI.com.
Simple.
Very simple, drderi.com, and my email is drderi33@gmail.
All right.
My phone numbers are on there. All my books are on there. I have about 4 books.
Yes, mention them if you'd like.
One is called Soulful Love, The Search for the Self.
You can show it if you put it up.
Well, yeah, these are currently out of print, so more have to be printed.
Up here,
but
up towards the camera.
But I do have the CD of it.
There you go.
And the CD also has nice meditations on it.
Oh, wonderful.
And then there are workbooks in all different colors for youth ages 8 to 14.
All right.
Choices in Self-Esteem.
Excellent.
Which has now been translated into Urdu in Pakistan. And into,
my goodness.
Another language in another country, and I'm trying to remember where that is. It's somewhere near India. I can't remember it.
How
come
unusual.
back to me. Well, I sent them off to them for them to translate. This is a very practical how to handle conflict handbook.
That's vital.
Pages.
Yes.
Yeah, and it has everything in it about appropriate responses. And then we have a CD on meditation, visualization, and relaxation, and another book called Bridging the Gap to Peace, From a New Way of Thinking into Action. And
Excellent.
It's all available off the website.
Well, excellent, and thank you. You've been a marvelous guest, and thank you for coming to the program.
Thank you for having the program. Bye for now.
And for those of you at home, thank you for tuning in and stepping outside of the box here on sbnvideo.tv, your one-stop place for all things spiritual. Until next week, let peace and love be your guide.